He forgot her birthday. Not on purpose, at least that's what he told her that night. It came up casually, the way small things do when life has been reduced to routines and rhythms. Tomorrow. His face froze for just a second too long. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Said she was old enough not to celebrate things like that anymore. Said it didn't matter. Birthdays were for kids anyway. She laughed it off quickly. Told him he could start talking like that once he earned more. Age was just an excuse for being forgetful. And he smiled, even though the gift was already there, hidden somewhere in the room. A small box wrapped carefully, something he'd picked out weeks ago. She had always been his happiness, his reason for waking up in the morning, his reason for coming home at night. Before the hospital rooms, the curtains, before the word cancer became the only thing that mattered. Everything changed then. When the diagnosis came, they said she had half a year left, 6 months. For them, the world stopped. He swore then that he would do everything he could so they could stay together as long as possible. He wouldn't waste a single moment. She wouldn't have to face any of it alone. Half a year passed, and Chica was still alive, still breathing. The doctors called it remarkable. But nobody talked about what came after. About continuing to live when everyone had already prepared for you to be gone. Every morning followed the same rhythm now. A routine carved out of necessity and exhaustion and love that didn't know how else to show itself anymore. He arrived early, always early, because the thought of her waking up alone in that room made something in his chest tighten. The hospital hallways were always too bright, too clean. He hated the smell, every day, without fail. He pushed open the door to her room quietly, tried not to make too much noise, but she heard him anyway, always complained when he opened the curtains without warning. The light hurt. Everything hurt. He apologized, set his bag down where she'd indicated yesterday, and the day before that. Always in the same spot. This was their life now. He left her pocket money where she could reach it, asked if she needed anything else, only for her to brush it off. Said she was doing fine, said she was doing her best, even though she was going to die anyway. He didn't know what to say to that. He apologized again, told her to rest, said he'd be back later. He said he loved her. She didn't respond. Outside the room, voices drifted through the hallway. Nurses talking, other visitors coming and going. He heard his name mentioned, Mr. Takahashi. They talked about how incredible it was that he visited every day, every single day without exception. About how young she was, how unfair it all seemed. About love and dedication. Things they probably thought he couldn't hear. He kept walking, pretended he hadn't heard any of it. He kept walking, even when being there hurt, when she barely looked at him anymore, when he couldn't tell whether his presence made things worse instead of better. He had to keep going. Back at home that night, he sat at his table, bills spread out in front of him, bank statements, medical invoices, a ledger where he tracked every expense. The numbers blurred together after a while. Seems like we made it through this month too. He looked at the column where he tracked her spending, the pocket money he left her, the small things she asked for. What does she even need the money for? The thought formed before he could stop it. And immediately guilt crashed over him. No, money shouldn't be a problem. She should be able to have whatever she wants, whatever makes her happy, whatever makes this easier. He just needed to save a little more, cut back on other things. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. He closed the ledger, stared at the ceiling, wondered when everything had become so complicated. Then remembered he forgot to go to the laundromat again. The place was mostly empty when he arrived, the sound of machines spinning, water sloshing. He loaded the washer, set the cycle, and sat there. And while he waited, memories surfaced. Her voice was the first thing that came back to him, irritated in that familiar way, reminding him that he'd forgotten again, that there were no fresh clothes, that she'd been wearing the same outfit for days now, saying she didn't really mind, but saying it anyway, letting the complaint linger just long enough for him to understand it was never really about the clothes. He remembered standing there, listening, already aware that what she was reacting to was the stillness, the repetition, the feeling that days were passing without anything shifting. And then, without warning, another similar moment followed it. A memory from when things hadn't felt fragile yet, when a careless glance at her underwear made her blush and turned what should have been an awkward interruption into something lighter. Back then, it hadn't created distance between them. Any chore, any small moment, any quiet stretch of time could turn into something unforgettable, not because of what they were doing, but because being together made even the most ordinary moments feel full. He kept reminding himself that he wasn't the one carrying the worst of it, that it was Chica whose life had been rerouted without warning, whose body had turned against her, whose future had narrowed into something unrecognizable, and that whatever exhaustion or frustration he felt didn't compare to that. They had promised each other something once, to stay, to take care of each other no matter what. His phone buzzed in his hand, a message from Chica asking him to bring a cake the next day for her friends who were coming to visit. 6 months of the same routine had blurred together. Half a year of hospital rooms and rehearsed smiles. 6 months of watching her slip further away in small ways until she stopped meeting his eyes, stopped letting her hand rest in his. And then the thought appeared, not all at once, quiet enough to pretend it hadn't happened, but it stayed. He caught himself wondering when it would finally be over. The realization made him nauseous. His hands shook as he pressed near his face, horrified by the fact that the thought had even formed, by what it suggested pushed into without noticing. But the thought didn't disappear. It sat there, impossible to pull back once it had surfaced. And what frightened him most wasn't that it existed, but the fear that one day it might leave his head, spoken aloud, reaching her ears, and that fear followed him longer than anything else. He arrived at the hospital earlier than he meant to, leaving him standing in the hallway outside her room with a small white box in a bag. He wondered briefly whether she even liked the same things anymore, whether illness could reach something as small as taste and erase that too. Voices came through the door. One of her friends was already there. He told himself he should go in, that there was no reason to wait, but something held him still, something that made him pause just long enough for the words on the other side to become clear. The voice was familiar, someone Chica had known for a long time, speaking carefully, almost hesitantly, suggesting that maybe she'd been too hard on him, that maybe she didn't need to say such cruel things all the time, pointing out how worn he'd looked lately, how much he was carrying on his own without complaint. There was a brief silence, followed by Chica's laughter, thin and strained, nothing like the sound he remembered, her asking if she was pushing it, but asking what else she was supposed to do with everything she was carrying, reminding her friend that she was the one who was dying. He should have left then, should have turned around and walked away, but he didn't. Her friend tried again, gently this time, saying that even after Chica was gone, he would still be here, still living, still carrying whatever was left behind. The quiet that followed stretched long enough to make him wonder if the conversation had ended, only for Chica to speak again, her voice lowered, steadier than before, admitting that she understood, that this was exactly why she'd made a decision, that before she died she was going to take everything she wanted from him, so that when it was over, he could finally feel relieved, free to enjoy the rest of his life without being anchored to her absence. The box in his hands felt heavier. Her friend reacted with disbelief, pointing out how obvious it was, how bad Chica had always been at pretending, and Chica answered calmly that she knew, that it was why she avoided looking at him, why she kept her distance, because otherwise it would show too clearly, admitting that she could already see him slipping away from her, losing his feelings piece by piece, and that maybe that was for the best. Maybe that was what would make things easier for him in the end. She asked her friend to keep it secret. The curtain opened suddenly. Her friend rushed out and nearly collided with him, stopping short when she saw his face, the way he was standing there, and she understood immediately. She apologized quickly and hurried down the hallway without waiting for a response. He didn't move. His hands trembled slightly as everything he'd just heard settled into place. The coldness hadn't been accidental. The distance hadn't been neglect. The cruelty hadn't been loss of feeling. It had all been deliberate. She had been pushing him away so that when she died, he wouldn't be destroyed by it, so that relief could come before grief, so that guilt wouldn't follow him for the rest of his life. The realization hit him with a weight he hadn't been prepared for. Before he could think, his body moved. He rushed to the edge of the bed. She looked up when he pulled the curtain back, startled, snapping at him for coming in without saying anything, her voice sharp and defensive like she was already expecting a fight. That was when it clicked for him. That was why she never looked at him anymore, why she kept turning her face from him. Silence filled the space between them until she broke it by telling him she didn't need the cake anymore, that he should leave, that he was bothering her, turning toward the window instead of him, choosing distance the way she always did. He told her that if she was going to keep lying to him, keep pushing him away, then he could do the same. His vision blurred and the words came out before he could stop them, messy and desperate, telling her he hated her, hated what she was doing, hated that she thought this was helping, hated the way she kept shutting him out, hated that she wouldn't even look at him, tears running freely down his face as he stopped trying to hold himself together. She answered quietly, almost too soft to hear, telling him to get away from her if that was how he felt. He said he would, but instead of leaving, he stepped closer, pulled her into his arms, held on tighter than he had in months, ignoring her weak attempts to push him away until they stopped, until her body finally gave in against his. That was when she broke, her body shaking as she cried into him, and he held her there, crying too, in the middle of the quiet hospital room with machines humming steadily in the background. And for the first time in half a year, it felt like they were actually together, not just in the same place, not just going through the motions, but really there with each other. They stayed like that for a long time, both of them afraid that letting go might undo whatever fragile piece they'd managed to find again. Eventually, she shifted back just enough to look at him properly, really looking at him for the first time in months, and told him she hadn't wanted him to spend his life mourning her, that she'd wanted him to be happy after she was gone. And when she started to explain that she thought making him hate her would make that easier, he stopped her, telling her he could never hate her, only what she'd been doing. The days after that felt different, softer. A few days later, her condition worsened. She slept more as the days passed. They talked again, For a brief moment, it felt like things had gone back to how they were before the hospital visits took over everything. He didn't know if it was timing or coincidence or something people would call fate to make sense of it, only that it didn't last. Just a few days after he finally learned the truth, after they stopped lying to each other, she was gone. The night before the funeral, he sat alone in their apartment. What followed wasn't pain at first, but emptiness. A hollow where something essential had been removed. Time stopped behaving normally after that. Minutes passed, or hours. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. Someone eventually came in and started asking practical questions about arrangements, about what came next. He answered without thinking, letting the words come out on their own. Yes, no, I'll handle it. Whatever you need. He was asked about the photograph. There was a recommended one, from before she was sick, smiling, put together, the version of her people preferred to remember. He looked at it. Then he said no. He showed the photo he had taken days earlier, after everything finally broke open between them. Both of them crying, faces red and swollen, not pretty and composed, but honest. He pointed to that photo and said this was the one. The director hesitated, suggested something more appropriate. He repeated himself. This one. That photo showed the truth. Not the easy memory, but when they found each other again. Two people, broken, but together. And that was enough.